On October 20th, 1994, ceremonies were held on the campus of Rice University in Houston, Texas, to break ground for a new facility to house the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy. 4 former U.S. presidents participated in the event. Former President Gerald R. Ford and former President George Bush were present. Former President Jimmy Carter and former President Ronald Reagan provided video messages. And now, the ceremonies.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Board of Governors, faculty, staff, and students of Rice University, welcome to the groundbreaking of the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy. Please welcome our distinguished dais participants, Dr. James R. Pomeratz, Dean of Social Sciences of Rice University, Dr. Malcolm Gillis, President of Rice University, the Honorable Charles W. Duncan, Jr., Chairman of the Board of Governors of Rice University and the Second Secretary of Energy, the Honorable Edward P. Jerigian, Director of the Baker Institute for Public Policy, the Honorable James A. Baker III, 61st Secretary of State, the Honorable Gerald R. Ford, 38th President of the United States, the Honorable George Bush, 41st President of the United States, Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to rise for the national anthem. Please join in listening to the Rice Chorale under the direction of Tom Jaber as they perform the Star-Spangled Banner.
Please be seated. Distinguished visitors and political leaders, delegates from educational institutions, members of our Board of Governors of Rice University, students, faculty, staff, and alumni of Rice University, good afternoon. It is a very special pleasure for me to welcome you to this groundbreaking for the new building that will house the Baker Institute for Public Policy. This inauguration of the Baker Institute represents one of the key steps in positioning Rice University for leadership in higher education in the 21st century. A groundbreaking is much more than just a ceremonial occasion to signal the arrival of new bricks and mortar and fiber optic cable to the university. A groundbreaking also provides an occasion for acknowledgement of our debt to certain people, and also an opportunity to express our hopes for the future. We owe a great debt indeed to Captain James Baker, Captain Baker, whose quick actions and sound judgment on 2 occasions saved the founding bequest of this institution. Today, Rice University is privileged to honor his grandson, James A. Baker III. It is most fitting that the legacy of the Baker family at Rice University is augmented today with the location of the Baker Institute for Public Policy on our campus. On behalf of the entire Rice community, I extend my warmest thanks and appreciation to all of those whose generosity has brought us to this day. We owe each of these donors an enormous debt of gratitude. Happily, many of them are present here today. Will you please join me in extending a gracious round of applause to these individuals, foundations, and corporations that are listed in your program. Additionally, I extend our deep appreciation to Jack Trotter and all of the members of the Baker Institute Leadership Committee for marshaling the resources necessary to launch this undertaking. We are also deeply in debt to those members of the faculty and administration whose vision was so instrumental in conceiving of a public policy institute on the Rice campus, and whose resourcefulness and dedication led to its actual establishment. Of this group, no one played a more vital, more central role than Professor Rick Stowe in political science, who is himself a distinguished analyst of U.S. foreign policy and national security policy. But there were numerous other faculty members. There were numerous other faculty members, particularly in economics, political science, and sociology, who also played pivotal roles in early discussions about the scope and purposes of the new institute, and to all of these scholars we owe our thanks. In the administration, former President George Rupp and Social Sciences Dean James R. Pomerantz were vigorous proponents of the Baker Institute from the beginning, while the wisdom and energy of John Rogers brought early momentum to the Institute. And over the past 18 months, Dean Pomerantz has played a central role in getting this new undertaking off the ground. We owe a debt of gratitude to all three. And as you know, Edward Jerigian, the former United States ambassador to Israel, has been appointed the first director of the Baker Institute, and he's here on the dais with us today. Mr. Ambassador, we look forward to your involvement and leadership in assisting the university in the continuing development of the programs of this institute. Now, by dint of all of these efforts, we convene here today to celebrate the construction of a distinctive new facility. Our expectation is that it will have a great impact, first on Rice University and ultimately upon our society. The building will house the Office of the Dean of Social Sciences, the departments of political science and of economics, and of course the Baker Institute. It will contain a forum for public events, an international conference center with state-of-the-art communication and teleconference equipment, a translation center, and an electronic library. The architect is Thomas H. Beebe of Hammond, Beebe and Babka of Chicago. Construction is expected to begin in January of this coming year, with completion expected by the fall of 1997. The Baker Institute is to be emphatically nonpartisan. It will not only bring together diverse scholarly disciplines, but it will also build bridges between scholars and men and women of action from the world of policymaking. It will provide an important new venue for open, vigorous discussion of practice and of ideas in the realm of public policy. We further expect the Baker Institute to become a leading source of solutions to many state and local and national problems, but beyond that, the Baker Institute will play a very critical and major role in the internationalization of Rice University as faculty, practitioners, students, and visitors focus also on vital international economic, social, and political issues. Now, these goals would be ambitious in any institution of higher learning. We expect the Baker Institute to fulfill these goals with great distinction. The people we have chosen and those yet to be chosen for the Baker Institute will be equal to these tasks. The namesake of the Baker Institute is synonymous with distinction. Few individuals have served this country as White House Chief of Staff. Few in our history have been Secretary of the Treasury or Secretary of State. But James A. Baker III has served his country in all three capacities, the only individual to ever have done so. It is my distinct pleasure on this most memorable day to introduce the 61st Secretary of State, James A. Baker III.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Malcolm. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Please. Thank you very much, President Ford, President Bush, Dr. Gillis, Charles Duncan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I would like to mention the floods that struck Houston and southeast Texas earlier this week. Many people have lost their homes and their property. Others, unfortunately, have lost their lives. And at a joyous moment like this, it is easy, I think, to forget the extraordinary hardship that many of our fellow citizens are enduring today. Our hearts go out to them, and so should our help. Now, I'd like to welcome all of you to this special ceremony and to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. At one level, of course, we are here to celebrate the groundbreaking of a new and beautiful addition to the Rice campus. But at another level, we are here, I think, to celebrate much, much more. Fundamentally, we are here today because we share a vision. We are here because we believe at this time of historic transformation at home and abroad, the United States needs to find new responses to the very new challenges, both foreign and domestic, that we face as a nation. And we are here because we believe that this institute, drawing on Rice University's long tradition of public service and academic excellence, can help bring a fresh, informed, and incisive voice to our national debate. We are here today, in short, because we believe that the Institute can make a difference. It can make a difference to our country and indeed the world. And I think it can make such a difference for three reasons. First of all, this institute will be committed to a fully integrated approach to public policy. The Institute's agenda will transcend the traditional but increasingly obsolete divisions between foreign policy on the one hand and domestic policy on the other. It will build bridges
between the world of action and the world of ideas by bringing practitioners and scholars together in a joint effort to understand and to address the underlying forces shaping our world today. Secondly, the Institute will be dedicated to intellectual innovation. The Institute's activities will look beyond yesterday's tried and tested solutions to the new responses that are going to be required by a world of breathtaking change. It will focus less on today's crisis-filled headlines than on the emerging economic, political, social, cultural, and scientific trends that will test policymakers well into the next century. And third, as Malcolm Gillis has just explained to you, this institute will be committed to strict nonpartisanship. Now, in a democracy like ours, of course, all public policy issues are inextricably linked to politics, because it is, after all, our citizens, through their elected officials, who have the final say on the course of public policy. And so it should be. Indeed, the 4 former presidents who are participating in today's ceremony, I think, symbolize the important link between public policy and the political process. All of them are leaders with deeply held, sometimes differing convictions about this wonderful country of ours and about its role in the world. All are leaders, too, who understand the need to shape public opinion and to forge political consensus within a democracy. And all of them are leaders, finally, who know that there are times, particularly in foreign policy, when partisan advantage has got to yield to the national interest. This is what nonpartisanship really means, not the avoidance of political controversy, but a respect for the differences found in a democratic society like our own, and most importantly of all, a fundamental commitment to the common good. It is that model of statesmanship that I think the Institute should emulate in all of its activities. And if we do so, I am convinced that we will realize the vision that brings us all here together today, a world-recognized center for the study of public policy, of which Rice University, the city of Houston, the state of Texas, and our nation can be proud. On a personal note, my grandfather, who was chairman of the board of this university for its first 50 years, as Malcolm has indicated, would, I know, be as proud as I am to see our family name continuing to be associated with this outstanding institution. And I am deeply humbled that you have chosen to honor me in this fashion. I pledge to you that I will do everything I can to fulfill your trust. To Presidents Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Bush, who have taken the time to be with us today, either in person or by recorded message, I say your presence makes this groundbreaking something truly special for all of us. To Malcolm Gillis, to Charles Duncan, to all of the governors and trustees of this university who have helped guide the development of the Institute from the very beginning, I say, we would not be here without you. To Jim Pomerantz, the other deans, and the entire faculty of Rice, with whom the idea of this institute originated, I say, we look forward to working with the entire Rice community even more closely in the months and years ahead. To Ed Dirigian, our first director, and to the members of our leadership committee who have done so much to ensure that the Institute will begin life on a firm footing, I say, the milestone that we mark today owes much to your efforts. And finally, my friends, to all of you here today, and to the many public-spirited citizens around the country whose interest and whose support for the Institute has helped to bring us so far, so soon, I say, thank you. Thank you and welcome to an occasion that you yourselves have made possible. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Secretary Baker. It is now my pleasure to introduce the 38th President of the United States, the Honorable Gerald R. Ford.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Gillis, President Bush, Jim Baker, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very high honor and a very rare privilege for me to have the opportunity to participate in this groundbreaking of the Baker Institute on the campus here of Rice University. I congratulate Rice University and its president, Dr. Gillis, for providing a home for the Baker Institute of Public Policy. I congratulate my very dear friend, Jim Baker, for his leadership in establishing the Institute and his very firm commitment that the Institute will be in the forefront in the development of new answers to America's challenges in the next century. I know from very personal experiences that Jim Baker exemplifies the very finest in America's high tradition of selfless public service. With some pride, I can point out that Jim was in my administration, serving as the number 2 in the Department of Commerce, when I decided that I needed a person of extraordinary talent and ability to manage the nomination campaign at the Republican Convention in Kansas City in 1976. We won in a tough contest with a very formidable challenger, and Jim, with his skill and ability, was a major factor in that success. After the convention, I drafted Jim to be my campaign manager in the contest against President Carter. Again, he did a superb job, and I said to him today, we probably would have won if he had had a better candidate to represent him. Well, President Reagan, recognizing the talent of Jim Baker, first had him as his chief of staff and subsequently as his Secretary of Treasury. Again, the record was outstanding under Jim Baker's leadership. And following that, President Bush made Jim his Secretary of State, where Jim performed superbly and handled in a very able way the collapse of the communist empire and the very difficult times in the Middle East. Jim, your achievements in public service are absolutely extraordinary. We applaud you for your superb dedication to good government, and I'm proud to have been associated with you. I'm very certain that the scholars and the public officials at Rice University's Baker Institute will carefully analyze history in their formulation of new policies for the remainder of this decade and the next century. The study of history can as I've learned over a good many years. Number one, help us to avoid the mistakes of the past and/or give us some guidelines to follow for future success. I respectfully hope that the Baker Institute, as it looks to the future for answers, will review U.S. foreign policy from, say, 1945 through 1960, the so-called post-World War II years. In this very critical period, when new allegiances around the world were being formed, and two superpowers were confronting one another, there was a high degree of political bipartisanship on the one hand, and White House congressional cooperation on the other. And as a result, the United States and its allies were successful in meeting the challenge of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. I happen to think that was a heyday in American foreign policy in this century. Let me illustrate. In the late 1940s, with the end of World War II, President Harry Truman, a Democrat, recommended to the Congress the Marshall Plan, Greek-Turkish aid, huge expenditures of federal funds to help in the rebuilding of the Western European countries devastated by World War II. At the same time, in the Congress of the United States, Senator Arthur Vandenberg, a Republican, and others on the Republican side joined in helping to get President Truman the necessary authorizations and appropriations. And the net result of that kind of bipartisanship, Western Europe had prosperity, and on the other side of the Iron Curtain there was poverty. Secondly, in the early 1950s, President Eisenhower, a Republican, promoted NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, with its military setup. At the same time, in the Congress, Speaker Sam Rayburn, a great speaker, a Texas Democrat, and Lyndon Johnson, the majority leader in the Senate, joined with President Eisenhower. And the net result, for 40-some years, there was peace in Europe, the longest period of peace in some 200 years. And then just a little later, in 1975, 35 nations joined together, including the Soviet Union, in what was called the Helsinki Accord, where nations on both sides of the Iron Curtain agreed to emphasize human rights. Of course, we on our side approved and supported human rights, and the difference was dramatic. On the other side, human rights were denied. But in this case, as in the two earlier ones, bipartisanship was the way in which success was achieved. In each of the three instances, the best of bipartisanship or nonpartisanship between Democrats and Republicans and cooperation between the White House and the Congress took place. As a consequence, America's policies were successful and supported by the American people across the board. I respectfully suggest that the kind of cooperation I've described is needed today in the nation's capital. Today, America is the world's superpower, militarily, economically, politically, diplomatically. To use this power constructively and effectively, we must maximize bipartisanship politically and cooperation between the executive and the legislative branches of government. The Baker Institute here on the Rice campus can play an important role in the formulation of policies that produce such cooperation and hopefully unanimity beyond our shores. Knowing Jim Baker, with his record of responsible foreign and economic policies, knowing the high quality of academics at Rice University, I predict the Baker Institute will design policy proposals aimed at banishing war from our shrinking world and hate from our expanding hearts. I have faith in Jim, in Rice University, and the Baker Institute. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, President Ford. It is now my pleasure to introduce a video presentation by the 39th President of the United States, the Honorable Jimmy Carter.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, and all my friends at Rice, especially Charles Duncan, who I know is there today. When I was asked to participate in the groundbreaking ceremony for the Baker Institute, I was honored to agree for 3 reasons. First, because of my own deep respect for Jim Baker as a man and as a public servant. Secondly, because of my admiration for Rice University, one of the South's and our nation's finest institutions of higher education. But third, and most of all, because of my own abiding commitment to the cause of public policy, both when I was in government and during the years since. The Baker Institute becomes into existence at a historic moment for our country and the world. The end of the Cold War, the rising importance of technology, and the accelerating struggle for human dignity and freedom all around the globe have raised new questions about America's role, and indeed about the nature of our society itself. Those new questions demand new answers, and I believe that the Baker Institute can help provide them. It can do so, first of all, because of its commitment to nonpartisanship. Occasional differences between our political parties have concealed a major cause of our nation's success in the Cold War, which has a broad convergence of opinion between the mainstreams of both Democratic and Republican parties. Whether in terms of opposition to communist aggression, support for a strong national defense, or commitment to more open trade, Democrats and Republicans have been more united than divided when it comes to the key issues confronting our nation. This continuity has been symbolized by 2 recent events. The first, very dear to me, was a breakthrough in the search for Middle East peace, a search that reaches back decades through both Democratic and Republican administrations, and especially from the Camp David Accords to the Madrid Peace Conference. The second was the North American Free Trade Agreement, an agreement enthusiastically supported by all American presidents, current and former, whatever their party. I'm convinced that sustaining this continuity by maintaining nonpartisanship is one of the crucial tests confronting our nation today. And I believe that the Baker Institute can play an important role in helping our nation in this respect. I also believe that the Baker Institute can help us meet another critical challenge, the disappearing distinction between traditional foreign and domestic policy. This is perhaps most noticeable in the economic realm, where interdependence has become a fact of life for millions of American workers and businessmen, but in other areas too. Domestic and foreign policy have merged. Illegal immigration, illicit drugs, environmental degradation, and the spread of deadly diseases such as AIDS are all domestic issues, yet all are affected, even determined, by events occurring beyond our borders. Support for sustainable economic development in the Third World, provision of adequate food and housing to the hundreds of millions around the world without either, and mediation of disputes, even if distant, are all important elements of American foreign policy. But we can only understand this if we are willing to go beyond stark distinctions and begin to comprehend the subtle web of interdependence that ties us inextricably to the world beyond our borders. I see the Baker Institute as a home for precisely this sort of innovative thinking, the kind required if we are to make this crucial intellectual leap. And finally, I believe that the Baker Institute can help us meet yet another public policy challenge facing us as a nation today, the imperative to educate. At one level, of course, this means training a new generation of experts in public policy. But at a more profound level, one of the tasks of the Baker Institute is to reach beyond policy elites to a broader audience, to Rice students pursuing other interests, but each and every one of them a potential future leader, to the local community in its full ethnic and social richness, and perhaps most importantly, to the general American public. If there's one thing I've learned during my many years in public life, including 4 years in the White House, it's this: no matter how many experts there might be, no matter how experienced and knowledgeable, they can take the place of an informed citizenry. And this has never been truer than today, when we face a world altered almost beyond recognition. In a way, that's why I'm here today as you celebrate the groundbreaking of the Baker Institute, to honor Jim Baker and to join you as you begin a process of education that will continue for years and decades to come, and to congratulate all of you as the Baker Institute prepares to add its voice to the vital national public policy and the dialogue and debate that is just beginning. Good luck, Jim, and Godspeed to all of you associated with the Baker Institute for Public Policy. I'd like to add one other point. You know, this is a recorded message in the future. I wish I could be there today. Just a few hours ago, this morning as a matter of fact, I came back from Haiti on a mission that reminded me of the close cooperation that I had with Jim Baker when he was Secretary of State. As a Democratic president, I could have really been excluded from participation in some of the events that faced him and President Bush during their administration. But I never had one time when I turned to the State Department under Jim Baker and said, this is something we might do together, with me as a Democratic private citizen, you as a Republican Secretary of State, that he didn't say, Mr. President, come and join me in a common effort for peace, freedom, progress, and democracy. For that, Jim Baker, I thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce a video presentation by the 40th President of the United States, the Honorable Ronald Reagan.
Greetings to all those gathered today to celebrate the groundbreaking of the new Baker Institute for Public Policy. I send my congratulations and couldn't let this special occasion go by without sharing a few thoughts about the man and the cause. The man, of course, is Jim Baker, and the cause is public service. For me, at least, the two are nearly synonymous. Jim came to work with me as White House Chief of Staff at a very exciting and challenging moment in our country's history. As a new president, with a commitment to sweeping change, I knew I would need a strong White House team if we were to fulfill the mandate we had received from the American people. When I chose Jim to head that team, a man who had served as campaign manager for my last opponent in the Republican primaries, I'll admit that a few heads were scratched. And those same heads were scratched again 4 years later when I asked Jim to become Secretary of the Treasury. In both cases, Jim convinced the doubters. He never had to convince me, because from the very beginning of our relationship, I knew Jim Baker to be quite simply one of the finest public servants I had ever met. Acute intelligence, unwavering loyalty, deeply held principles, and an unparalleled expertise in politics helped make Jim Baker one of the most effective and respected individuals in American public life. By any standard, Jim's record of accomplishments is extraordinary, but it is also fundamentally a record of service, not just to presidents, but to the American people. During his years in government, Jim Baker helped make America a more prosperous and secure nation, and he helped make the world a safer and freer place. He served, and by serving, made a difference. This is why it is so appropriate that Jim Baker is giving his name and dedicating his efforts to the Public Policy Institute, whose ground we break today. It too is committed to excellence in service of the public good, and it too can make a difference. I have no doubts about the Baker Institute's success. After all, how could it not succeed? It has Jim Baker to guide its development. It embodies that endless search for solutions that remains an enduring and precious element of the American spirit of optimism. Good luck to you, Jim, and to each and every one of you associated with the Baker Institute at Rice University. Thank you, and may God bless you all.
It is now my pleasure to introduce the 41st President of the United States, the Honorable George Bush.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Dr. Gillis. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for that welcome. And thank you, Dr. Gillis, and Charles Duncan, and everybody else who has worked so hard to make this day the obvious, spectacular success that it is. I would like to thank the Rice Chorale and the quartet here for their wonderful music. They were superb. They all came out even on the Star-Spangled Banner. Very difficult. And I'm very pleased to see our mayor here today and other leaders from Houston. I know we have a couple of diplomats here, the ambassador from Mongolia, and of course a dear friend of ours, Barbara's and mine, and Jim and Susan's, an ally, a colleague in a sense, His Royal Highness Prince Bandar, the ambassador of Saudi Arabia. America had no stauncher friend nor ally than Prince Bandar and his country during the Desert Storm fray. I also want to salute Ed Dirigian, with whom I have worked. I would say to his colleagues on the Rice faculty now, you're getting one of the very best that the Foreign Service had, a true patriot, a great ambassador, and you're going to have a wonderful addition to this fantastic campus of yours. Let me also thank my former colleague, my boss, my mentor, my advisor when I was president, President Gerald Ford. What a joy it is to have him here on the campus. And I too would like to identify myself with Jim's remarks about our neighbors who've lost their homes and their property and some of the lives of family members right here in Harris County and beyond. They are in our thoughts and prayers. And let me also say what a pleasure it is to be part of another special event at Rice. It was only a few years ago that you and I and Jim hosted the Houston Economic Summit right here at Rice University, where leaders representing 2/3 of the world's economy gathered to meet and discuss the amazing changes in the world. And it's a pleasure to be here for such a momentous day in the life of our friend, a close personal friend. Jim and I go back a long way in politics, before that in private life, and then all during politics in our private lives. He and Susan and Barbara and I have been close personal friends, so I can speak for the heart on this one. We've been with each other through good times and bad times, happiness and tears, and I treasure our friendship. Both Jim and I are very fortunate men. We've always felt strongly about putting something back into the system, into society. You can call it old-fashioned, but the concept of service is important to both of us. And Jim is a man who, through his many long nights of burning the midnight oil, through every one of those 90 foreign countries and every inch of the 700 miles he traveled at the State Department, never gave up the notion that it's America's duty, her destiny, to lead the world on the diplomatic front, and lead he did. Moving America forward is the mission of the Baker Institute, and bringing a fresh perspective to our public policy debate, away from the Beltway and its so-called conventional wisdom. This institute will act as a new voice for intellectual innovation, and like Jim himself, it'll bridge the worlds of foreign and domestic, public and private. And because of his reputation for excellence, he'll attract leaders and scholars and business people, respected policymakers. As a private citizen, I've spent the last couple of years traveling with Barbara in this remarkable post-Cold War world. And think of the sweeping changes that we were so fortunate to play a role in. The fall of the Berlin Wall, German unification, the end of the Cold War, the magnificent victory in the Persian Gulf. And all came about because of the leadership of our country, and all came about because of that shared vision of American greatness, which has been the hallmark of Jim Baker's public life. The Baker Institute will ennoble that greatness and embody it. And so with that said, I never would speak for the best-selling author in the entire United States of America, but on this one I will, and say how pleased that Barbara and I are to be here for such an important day in the life of this nation and in the life of our dear friend, Secretary Jim Baker. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bush. We thank you all for coming today. Our students thank you. We have dozens of our faculty here today. They thank you, as does our board and our staff and our alumni. We thank you for sharing our excitement and pride in what will be a splendid new facility, which will be so very important, we hope, to Rice, Houston, and we expect the larger national and international community. I would ask that you remain seated while our honored guests prepare to break ground for the new Baker Institute building. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the video monitor above as our distinguished guests break ground. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Rice University and the Baker Institute for Public Policy, thank you for joining us on this most historic day.
For more information on the Baker Institute, you may write to the Baker Institute, Rice University, 6100 Main Street, Houston, Texas, 77005-1892, or you may call 713 527 4683.